One reason that I typically hike big mile days when backpacking is because I would get bored just sitting in camp. Over the years, I've made a few chairs at home using green wood and hand tools, and I got the idea that it might be kind of fun to spend a day in camp just making a chair. Since I have a strong pattern of underestimating both the time and effort that goes into a project, it seemed like a good idea to test this concept in the backyard first, before making the attempt in the backcountry. True to form, it took much longer than expected, but in the end I was successful, so here's how it went. The first order of business was to build a fire in the pit, since it was a frigid spring day. I wanted to gather both an old dead tree and cut a green one too. The small branches from the dead tree would make a great start for the fire, but the bigger reason for the mix has to do with how the wood ages. Ideally, if you make the horizontal pieces of the chair with dry wood and the vertical ones with green, as the green wood dries, it shrinks and forms a tight bond around the dry wood tenons. Here are the tools I used. First is a backpacking aluminum buck saw. This is called the Trailblazer, and unfortunately I don't think they make these anymore, but a Silky Big Boy or a Sven buck saw would work just fine. Second is a Bushcraft survival tool, sometimes called a Scotch eye, which has an auger bit on one side and a tenon jig for the other. Next, a solid hatchet. This guy's an old friend that is sharpened only on one side like a broadaxe, which makes it great for shaping things. Then I used a knife. This one is from Frost, Sweden, and is really sharp and light. But I also like the Mora Light My Fire knife too, and really any hunting knife would do. Last is a tool called a gimlet, which I made myself from a scrap piece of oak dowel and an old 3/8" auger bit. I started by cutting the upright pieces for the back of the chair, and since I didn't want to carry a tape measure, figured I could just use body parts, so I made these breast high. That was okay, but from an aesthetic viewpoint was probably about 6 inches too tall. For the second upright, I just made sure it was the same length as the first. I set aside the butt of the tree to use for the front vertical pieces. Those were measured as a cubit, which is from the fingertips to the elbow. With this type of saw, it's best not to just power through the cut as fast as possible, because the blade will wander and not cut straight. By shifting the handle right to left as needed and paying close attention, a straighter cut can be managed. The top of the green tree would make pieces for the seat and backrest, all a cubit in length. I gathered more dry sticks to use for cross pieces, which would also be a cubit in length and about the diameter of the thumb and forefinger when making the OK sign. When making big sticks into little sticks, it's good to have helpers who are experts at that sort of thing. Before getting into assembling the chair, it's worth taking time to make a mallet. It's very easy to do and makes a big difference later on. You could just bang away at things with a branch like I'm using to make the mallet, but branches break and the mallet is a more precise tool as well as durable. Plus, it's just fun to create a tool that you put to use immediately. Because of that bend, I want to have this be the front face, so I want to make sure that it's twisted around the right way. So that can be the face. Notice that the handle is dry wood and the head is green, so that will be tight when it dries, although I will pin it with a dowel to make sure. On the other hand, using a full round like this means it will check and possibly split when it dries and shrinks, but that will happen long after I'm done with it. Here I'm splitting out pieces to make dowels for pinning the mallet handle. Now that the supposedly easy task of making a mallet was conquered, I could finally move on to shaping the chair pieces. These would be the front legs of the chair. I'm using the Scotch eye as a gauge to get the size of the tenon correct, the hatchet for roughing in, and switch to using the knife when getting close to the right diameter, mainly to avoid overshooting and getting the tenon too small. The more of these joints I made, the more aggressive I learned to be with the hatchet, so I didn't have to spend quite as much time with the knife, saving that for the fine tuning at the end. I also learned to move the tool I wasn't using off to the side and out of the way.
Well, there's the front. I had planned to have to peg these joints, but this is a testament to how powerful it is to have dry cross members and green vertical members, is that it's completely solid now. It's been a couple of weeks since I first did that, and you couldn't take those apart if you wanted to. Very solid.
I made a mistake here because the top cross piece is actually dry wood. As I was designing the chair in my head, it seemed like a great idea to have the legs be tenoned into the top, which would prevent them from spreading apart. However, that defeated the advantage of the joint getting tight when drying because the green uprights will shrink and actually get looser in time. This can be fixed by pinning the tenon, but it would have been better to have the top cross piece tenon into the legs, just like the support piece down below.
So I made this chair a long time ago with green woodworking techniques and just hand tools. There's no metal in it. And I just wanted to show it to you quick because this chair is 27 years old. Just a great demonstration of how amazingly sturdy and strong and durable these techniques are. And this chair has not been babied at all. It's been sitting out in the weather on my deck all that time. And of course the seat is cannibalized from another chair, but you can see how the joints are still strong, and even though there's a little bit of checking, it doesn't split out like you would normally expect. That's because when you're using the green techniques and hand tools, you just shave along the fibers rather than cutting the fibers. And so they are much more stable over the long term. It's really amazing that a chair like this can last so long.
Another trick I learned was to drill a hole in a test piece so I could try out each tenon as they were being made. You can see here how important it was to be wearing a glove on my left hand, otherwise I would have been poked full of holes from the tip of the knife. Through trial and error, I figured out that a couple of large rounds are more comfortable than lots of small sticks. So these big pieces will be the uprights of the backrest. Just trying to estimate the proper spacing of the uprights so that there is a gap in the middle for the spine, but the supports aren't too far apart. By keeping the first upright in place, it lets me sight along it to get the second hole lined up, both in the same line and also the angle of the hole. I'm using the knife to mark the holes for the lower cross piece of the backrest so they line up with the top. There's a million ways to make seats, most of which involve weaving. Since this is a project I want to make and leave in the backcountry, it must be completely biodegradable, so that rules out synthetic strapping, and natural sources such as cedar bark or rushes would take too much time to gather and process. That's why I wanted to experiment with this rather unusual style using two wide logs to support the pelvis, just to see if it would work.
Okay, I think I'm ready to put it together. That's the back, the bottom of the back, the seat, and the backrest. And this is the front, and that's the seat and the bottom supports. We'll see if it works.
Starting from the bottom, I used the length of the Scotch eye tool to measure up from the base, then placed the uprights next to each other to line up the holes across to the other side. Once that was done, the front seat assembly was used to line up the holes from front to back, and the holes in the back were drilled about an inch lower to provide a slight backward slope for the seat. Again, I placed stakes in existing holes to line up the next holes in a vertical axis. Using the knife, I cut a little notch to mark where the holes for the backrest should go. Then it's drill and drill and drill. Lining up the seat pieces front to back and marking the holes with the knife. Since these parts couldn't be set beside each other, I used the mallet head as a measurement to line up the holes.
Well, there you go. Clunky, ugly, and only a little comfortable. But at least it's proof of concept that I could sit around in camp and build a chair. Although, like most projects, it took about 3 times longer than I expected. All of these tenons should be pinned, really. That would take a whole nother day probably, but that would be helping a lot to keep it from falling apart. But there you go.